Shivara the Magnificent sat alone in her quarters on Station Karis 9. The room was huge and beautiful, filled with golden furniture and floating holographic displays. But today none of it mattered. Today marked 500 cycles since her empire fell, 500 cycles since everything changed. Outside her window, ships came and went from the massive orbital station. Humans, Velkari, Centaurians, dozens of species doing business in the Andromeda Reach. They all walked on their own legs. They all had bodies that obeyed them. Shivara looked down at her wheelchair. It was made of the finest materials, floating on anti-gravity cushions, but it was still a prison. Her legs hadn't worked since the Succession War, when her own cousin fired fusion weapons at her during a battle over the throne. The blast should have killed her. Sometimes she wished it had. The Drakari people believed in physical perfection. Warriors should be strong. Leaders should be powerful. The disabled were expected to take the honor death, to end their own lives rather than live with shame. When Shivara refused, her people abandoned her. She was the last of the royal bloodline, and she was completely alone. She pressed a button on her chair's armrest. A hologram appeared in the air, showing images from her past. Great warships shaped like dragons flying through space, armies that bowed before her. A throne room filled with advisors. All gone now. All just memories. A small chime sounded. Someone was working on the environmental systems near her quarters. Shivara ignored it. She didn't care about repairs or station maintenance. She didn't care about much of anything anymore. But then she heard something unusual, a child's voice. High and bright and curious. Children never came to the diplomatic sector. It was too boring, too formal. Shivara turned her wheelchair toward the door, listening. Marcus Webb was having a bad day. The senior techs were all celebrating Station Day, which meant he got called to fix the environmental controls in the fancy diplomatic area. He didn't belong here. He was just a mechanic who worked in the station's lower levels, keeping old air recyclers and water systems running. But someone had to do the job, and today that someone was him. His daughter Emma was with him because he couldn't find anyone to watch her. She was 7 years old and full of energy. Her mother had died 3 years ago in a freighter accident, and since then, it had just been the two of them. Marcus did his best, but some days it was hard. Today was one of those days. He had told Emma to stay close while he worked. But Emma had other ideas. While Marcus was elbow-deep in a control panel, she wandered off down the corridor. She had seen something interesting, lights and colors coming from under a door. Emma pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. Inside, she found the most amazing room she had ever seen. There were holograms everywhere, showing spaceships and stars and planets. And in the middle of it all sat a tall woman in a floating wheelchair. The woman had pale blue skin and silver eyes. She looked surprised to see Emma. Most people would have been scared. The Drakari had a reputation. They were telepathic, telekinetic, and very dangerous. But Emma didn't know any of that. She just saw a lonely lady in a pretty chair. Shivara stared at the human child. This was impossible. No one entered her quarters without permission. No one. She should send the child away immediately. But there was something about the way the girl looked at her. No fear, only curiosity and a bright smile. Emma walked closer, looking at the holograms. She pointed at one showing a dragon-shaped ship. The child asked what it was. Shivara, still surprised, explained that it was a Drakari warship. Emma said it was beautiful. No one had called her ships beautiful in a very long time. Then Emma noticed something else. There was a small cake on a table near Shivara's chair. It had one candle on it. Emma asked if it was her birthday. Shivara hesitated, then nodded. In human terms, yes, it was something like a birthday. Emma's face fell. She looked at Shivara, then at the empty room, then back at Shivara. With the simple honesty that only children have, Emma said that birthdays shouldn't be sad. They should be happy. You should have friends and family. You shouldn't be alone. Something cracked in Shivara's chest. This child understood. Without knowing anything about Drakari culture or royal bloodlines or honor deaths, this little human understood the most important thing. No one should be alone on their birthday. That was when Marcus burst through the door, his face pale with panic. He had realized Emma was missing and followed the sound of her voice. When he saw where she was, he went even more pale. His daughter was bothering the Dragon Queen, the last of the Drakari royalty, one of the most powerful beings in this sector of space. Marcus grabbed Emma's hand and started apologizing. He said he was sorry over and over. He would leave immediately. He would make sure it never happened again. Please don't report him to station security. He needed this job. It was just the two of them and he couldn't afford to lose his work permit. But Emma interrupted her father. She tugged on his sleeve and said they should invite the lady to dinner. The lady was having a birthday and she was all alone. Daddy made really good synth pasta. They could share it. It would be nice. Marcus wanted to die right there on the spot. His 7-year-old daughter had just invited the Dragon Queen to their tiny hab unit for cheap synthetic pasta. This was it. This was how his life ended. He started apologizing even more frantically. Shivara watched the human mechanic stumble over his words. She saw how he held his daughter's hand protectively. She saw the love and fear mixed together in his eyes. And she saw the hope in the child's face, simple, pure hope that maybe the lonely lady would say yes. For 500 cycles, Shivara had maintained her dignity. She had kept herself separate from the lesser species that filled the station. She had remembered her place as royalty, even if no one else did. But right now, looking at this man and his daughter, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt curiosity. She felt the tiniest spark of something that might be hope. Shivara told them yes. She would come to dinner. Just this once. For anthropological research, she told herself. To study human customs. That was all. Marcus's mouth fell open. Emma cheered. And for the first time in 500 cycles, Shivara the Magnificent left her quarters to have dinner with friends, even if she didn't quite know that was what they were yet. Shivara had spent centuries in luxury. Her old throne room could have held 1,000 people. Her private quarters on Station Karis 9 had ceilings so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. She was used to space and silence and the cold beauty of wealth. Marcus Webb's hab unit was none of those things. It was small, maybe 20 feet across. The walls were covered with Emma's drawings, stuck up with tape that was starting to peel. There was a tiny kitchen area, a table that folded down from the wall and 2 sleeping bunks stacked on top of each other. Everything was old and worn but very clean. When Shivara's wheelchair floated through the door, she had to duck her head. The ceiling was much lower than she was used to. Emma didn't seem to notice anything wrong. She bounced around excitedly, showing Shivara her favorite drawings and her small collection of toy spaceships. Marcus worked in the kitchen, his face still red with embarrassment. He kept apologizing for the small space, the cheap furniture, the fact that all he had to offer was synthetic pasta. Shivara told him it was fine. She didn't mention that she found the place strange and uncomfortable. That would be rude, but as dinner started, something unexpected happened. There was laughter. Emma told silly jokes that didn't make sense. Marcus tried to explain why they were funny, which somehow made them funnier. Shivara found herself making a sound she hadn't made in decades, a soft, surprised laugh. The pasta was terrible. It tasted like chemicals and cardboard, but Emma ate it happily, and Marcus served it with such care that Shivara found herself eating it too. When had she last shared a meal with anyone? When had she last sat at a table with voices around her instead of silence? Emma asked questions constantly. What was Shivara's homeworld like? Could she really move things with her mind? Why was her skin blue? Marcus tried to shush his daughter, worried that the questions were rude, but Shivara didn't mind. The curiosity was honest, pure. No one had been curious about her in a long time. Most people were just afraid. Then Emma asked about the wheelchair. She wanted to know what had happened. Marcus went pale and tried to change the subject, but Shivara held up a hand. It was okay. She would answer. She told them about the war. Not all the details. Those were too violent for a child, but enough. There had been a battle. Someone she trusted had hurt her. Her spine was damaged. Her legs didn't work anymore. In her culture, this meant she was broken, useless. She was supposed to end her own life to avoid the shame. Emma's eyes went wide. She asked why anyone would do that. Why would you die just because your legs didn't work? That seemed really dumb. Marcus choked on his water. He apologized again, but Shivara was staring at Emma with something like wonder. The child had just called the most sacred law of the Drakari Empire dumb. And she was right. It was dumb. Marcus tried to explain it better. He said that sometimes different cultures had different rules. Shivara shook her head. She said Emma was right. It was a stupid rule. Her people worshipped physical perfection so much that they couldn't see past it. They threw away anyone who wasn't perfect, even if those people were smart or skilled or wise. Marcus mentioned his friend Jake. Jake had lost both legs in a mining accident years ago. Everyone thought his career was over. But Jake learned to work in zero gravity where legs didn't matter. Now he was the best welder in 3 sectors. Companies paid premium prices for his work. Jake's wife loved him. His kids were proud of him. He had a good life. Shivara had never heard anything like this. In Drakari space, Jake would have been expected to take the honor death. No one would have given him a chance. No one would have seen past the disability to the person underneath. The conversation went on for hours. They talked about Emma's school, where she was learning about different planets. They talked about Marcus's work, fixing the ancient systems that kept the station running. They talked about Shivara's past, though she left out most of the violent parts. At some point, Emma climbed onto the couch next to Shivara's wheelchair. She was tired, her eyes drooping. Shivara was telling a story about the great ice canyons of her homeworld, and Emma was fighting to stay awake to hear it. Finally, Emma lost the battle. She leaned against the side of Shivara's wheelchair and fell asleep, her small hand resting on the armrest. Shivara froze. No one had touched her voluntarily in decades. After she was injured, her people had kept their distance as if disability were contagious. Even the servants who helped her kept their contact brief and cold. But this child was sleeping peacefully against her chair, completely trusting, completely unafraid. Something broke open in Shivara's chest. It was painful and warm at the same time, like ice melting after a long winter. She realized that her eyes were wet. She was crying. She hadn't cried in 500 cycles. Marcus noticed but didn't say anything. He just quietly cleaned up the dinner dishes, giving Shivara time to compose herself. When he came back, he gently picked up Emma and carried her to her bunk. She mumbled in her sleep but didn't wake up. Shivara said she should go. It was late. Marcus walked her to the door. They stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then Marcus said something that surprised both of them. He said she could come back if she wanted. Emma would like that. He paused, then added that he would like it too. Shivara didn't know what to say. She managed a small nod, then guided her wheelchair out into the corridor. As the door closed behind her, she sat there for a moment thinking. For 500 cycles she had believed what her people told her, that she was broken, that she was worthless, that she deserved to be alone. But tonight, a human mechanic and his daughter had treated her like a person. Not a queen, not a curiosity, just a person who deserved kindness. As Shivara floated back to her vast, empty quarters, she found herself thinking about Marcus's invitation. She told herself it was just curiosity, anthropological interest in human customs, nothing more. But deep down, in a part of herself she thought had died long ago, Shivara knew the truth. She wanted to go back. She wanted to hear Emma's laugh again. She wanted to talk with Marcus about ordinary things. She wanted to feel that warmth again, that sense of connection. She wanted, desperately, to not be alone anymore. 3 days later, Shivara found herself floating through the station corridors toward the residential section. She told herself she was just checking on something, making sure the environmental repairs had been completed properly. That was all. But when she reached Marcus's door and pressed the chime, she knew she was fooling no one, especially not herself. Emma opened the door, saw Shivara, and immediately started bouncing with excitement. Marcus appeared behind his daughter, surprised but smiling. Without a word, he stepped aside and held the door open. Shivara the Magnificent, last of the Drakari royal bloodline, floated into the small, warm, cluttered hab unit. And for the first time in 500 cycles, she felt like she was coming home. The visits became regular. Every few days, Shivara would find herself floating through the station to Marcus's hab unit. Sometimes she brought things, Drakari sweets that Emma loved, or holographic displays that showed distant nebulas and star systems. Marcus always protested that she didn't need to bring gifts, but she could see how much Emma enjoyed them. Shivara started teaching Emma about the galaxy. She showed the girl how to read star maps and explained how different species had developed different kinds of faster-than-light travel. Emma soaked it all up like a sponge, asking questions that even surprised Shivara with their insight. No one had been excited by Shivara's knowledge in centuries. The other diplomats on the station saw her as a relic, a reminder of an empire that had fallen. But Emma saw her as someone amazing, someone who knew everything about the stars. It was intoxicating. Marcus and Shivara began talking during his late-night maintenance calls. The station's systems were old and constantly breaking down. Marcus would get called out at odd hours to fix air recyclers or water purifiers. Sometimes, if the problem was near the diplomatic sector, Shivara would help him troubleshoot. She had been trained as an engineer centuries ago, back when Drakari royalty learned all aspects of running an empire. At first, Marcus was nervous about accepting her help. But Shivara's suggestions were good, and soon they were working together naturally. She would float beside him in her wheelchair, pointing out problems in the ancient systems while he did the physical work. One night, after fixing a particularly difficult coolant leak, Marcus thanked her. He said she had probably saved him 5 hours of work. Shivara realized that she felt useful for the first time in decades, not as a figurehead or a symbol, but as someone who could actually help solve problems. She started consulting on other station systems, at first anonymously. The head engineer would bring her technical problems and she would suggest solutions. She didn't tell him she was doing it. She just let the advice come through Marcus. But slowly word got around that someone was helping improve the station's efficiency. Life started to have rhythm again. Emma's school schedule, Marcus's work shifts, Shivara's quiet evenings helping solve engineering problems. It wasn't the grand life she had lived as a queen, but it was something better. It was real. They shared their cultures too. Shivara played Drakari music for them, deep resonant frequencies that you felt in your bones more than heard with your ears. Marcus and Emma both said it gave them headaches, but they appreciated the sharing. In return, Marcus introduced Shivara to human jazz. The chaotic, unpredictable sounds confused her, but she found herself enjoying how it made Marcus smile. Then came Emma's school project. Each student had to do a presentation about their family. Emma worked on it for weeks, making drawings and collecting pictures. When she presented it to her class, she included Shivara. She had drawn a picture of the three of them, Marcus, Emma, and Shivara in her wheelchair, with the caption, "My friend who knows everything about stars." The teacher thought it was sweet. Some of the other parents did not. They complained that it was inappropriate to expose children to dangerous aliens. The Drakari had a reputation after all. They were telepathic, telekinetic, and their empire had once conquered entire star systems. Was this really who Emma should be spending time with? Marcus defended their friendship firmly. He said Shivara had been nothing but kind to his daughter. She had taught Emma more about science and the galaxy than any teacher could. And, more importantly, she had shown Emma what real friendship looked like. The complaints were dropped, but Marcus worried. He knew how people could be when they decided someone was dangerous. Then everything changed. A Drakari warship appeared at the edge of the station's space. It was massive, shaped like a dragon in flight, covered in weapons and armor. Nothing like that had been seen in this sector for decades. The station went on alert immediately. A message came through to Station Command. Lord Admiral Thakor, Shivara's cousin, was coming to speak with her. It was a matter of imperial importance. Shivara felt her blood run cold. She knew Thakor. He had been one of the commanders in the Succession War. He had stood by and done nothing while she was attacked. When she refused to take the honor death, he had been one of the loudest voices demanding she be declared dead to the Empire. What did he want after all this time? The meeting was formal. Thakor came to her quarters in full military dress, his armor gleaming. He looked at her wheelchair with barely disguised contempt. Then he delivered his message. The Drakari Empire was struggling. Their rigid culture, their worship of perfection, had left them unable to adapt to a changing galaxy. Other species were surpassing them. Their territory was shrinking. They needed help, and they had remembered that Shivara had been one of their best strategic minds. They wanted her to return. Not as queen, they would never accept that, but as a ceremonial advisor, a symbol of their ancient glory. And in exchange, they would heal her. Forced cybernetic replacement would give her working legs again. She could walk. She could be physical again. There was only one condition. She had to sever all contact with lesser species. The Drakari could not be seen associating with humans, Velkari, or any other inferior races. It was beneath them. She would return to Drakari space and stay there. Shivara listened to all this in silence. When Thakor finished, he gave her a deadline. She had 1 week to decide, return and reclaim some measure of her former status or be declared officially dead to the Empire. There would be no third chance. After he left, Shivara sat alone in her quarters, staring at nothing. The offer was tempting. She could walk again. She could have purpose again, even if it was just a ceremonial role. She could be part of something larger than herself. But it would mean leaving Marcus and Emma. It would mean abandoning this small, fragile thing she had built. This friendship, this family, if she was honest with herself, she didn't know what to do. For the first time in centuries, Shivara the Magnificent felt truly lost. She had faced armies and political intrigue and the collapse of her entire civilization, but this choice was harder than any of those things. Shivara stopped going to Marcus's HAB unit. She told herself she needed time to think, but the truth was she was afraid. Afraid of what she might choose. Afraid of what it would mean either way. Marcus and Emma didn't understand why she had suddenly pulled away. Emma worried that she had done something wrong. Marcus worried about something else entirely. He had seen the Drakari warship. He had heard the rumors, and he had a sinking feeling that Shivara was about to leave them. On the 5th day, Emma couldn't take it anymore. She snuck away from school and made her way to the diplomatic sector. She had done this before, so she knew the way. When she reached Shivara's door, she didn't wait for permission. She just walked in. Shivara was sitting by her window staring out at the stars. She looked sad and tired. When she saw Emma, her expression crumbled. Emma walked over and handed Shivara a piece of paper. It was a birthday card handmade with crayons and glitter. Inside, in Emma's careful handwriting, it said, "Please don't go. Your family." Shivara's hand shook as she held the card. She told Emma about the choice she had to make. Return to her people and walk again, or stay here and remain in this wheelchair forever. Emma listened seriously, then said something that broke Shivara's heart. Emma said that she couldn't tell Shivara what to do, but she wanted her to know that they loved her exactly as she was. Chair and all. And if she left, they would miss her every single day. Then Emma hugged her. Just wrapped her small arms around Shivara and held on tight. That was when Shivara finally understood. For 500 cycles, she had believed that her worth came from her power, her status, her physical ability. But this child loved her for none of those things. Marcus respected her for her mind and her kindness. They had given her something her empire never had: unconditional acceptance. The choice became clear. And it terrified her because she knew what it would cost. But for the first time in her life, Shivara was going to choose what she wanted, not what duty demanded. Marcus found Emma in Shivara's quarters an hour later. He had been searching frantically when the school called to say his daughter was missing. His first thought had been panic. His second thought had been that Emma had probably gone to see Shivara. When he arrived, he found them sitting together quietly. Emma was holding Shivara's hand. Shivara's face was wet with tears. Marcus understood immediately that something important had happened. Shivara told him everything. About Thakor's visit, the ultimatum, the impossible choice. She said she had been trying to decide alone because that was what she had always done. Queens made decisions alone, but Emma had reminded her that she wasn't just a queen anymore. She was also a friend, and friends didn't have to face things alone. Marcus sat down heavily. He had known this was coming, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. He asked Shivara what she wanted to do, not what she should do. Just what she wanted. Shivara looked at him, then at Emma, then back at him. She said that no one had ever asked her that before. Her whole life had been about duty, obligation, expectations. Even the choice to refuse the honor death had been about stubbornness, not about what she truly wanted. But now she knew. She wanted to stay. She wanted to keep teaching Emma about the stars. She wanted to help Marcus fix ancient station systems at 2 in the morning. She wanted terrible synthetic pasta and bad jokes and the warmth of friendship. She wanted this small, ordinary, wonderful life they had built together. Emma cheered. Marcus smiled, but he looked worried. He said he was glad, but he knew the Drakari wouldn't take no for an answer easily. Shivara agreed.
Skor would make trouble.
He always did, she was right. 2 days later, Lord Admiral Thakor demanded a formal hearing. He claimed that Shivara was not mentally fit to refuse the Empire's generous offer. She was clearly suffering from some kind of psychological breakdown. She needed to be returned to Drakari space for her own good. The hearing was held in the station's main diplomatic chamber. Representatives from dozens of species attended. The Corps stood before them all in his military armor, looking powerful and confident. He presented his case smoothly. Shivara had been isolated too long. She had forgotten her heritage. She was associating with inferior species, which proved her judgment was impaired. Then he played his trump card. He claimed that Shivara's continued presence on the station was a security risk. The Drakari Empire had every right to reclaim one of their own citizens. Station authorities could not legally stop them. The station commander looked uncomfortable. The Corps was technically correct. Diplomatic law was complicated, but the Drakari had strong legal grounds. Unless Shivara herself rejected the claim, she could be taken by force. Shivara prepared to speak. She would reject it, of course, but before she could, something unexpected happened. Marcus stood up. He was the only human in a room full of powerful aliens and diplomats. His work clothes were stained with grease. He looked completely out of place, but he spoke clearly and firmly. Marcus said that he was just a mechanic. He didn't understand fancy diplomatic words or legal treaties, but he understood one thing very clearly. Shivara was his friend. She had chosen to stay here, with people who cared about her, and no fancy law should be able to force someone to leave their home against their will. The Corps laughed. It was cold and contemptuous. He said that a human mechanic had no standing in this matter. This was Drakari business. What could a mere human possibly understand about honor, duty, or the needs of an empire? Marcus looked the Corps straight in the eyes. He said that he understood plenty. He understood that the Corps had traveled all this way because the Drakari Empire needed Shivara. They needed her wisdom and experience. But what were they offering her in return? A ceremonial position, isolation from everyone she cared about, the chance to walk again, but only if she gave up everything else that mattered. Marcus continued. He said the Drakari called themselves superior, but they had abandoned Shivara when she needed them most. They had expected her to die rather than live with a disability. Now they wanted her back only because they needed something from her. Meanwhile, he and Emma had simply offered Shivara friendship. No conditions, no expectations. Just a place at their table and the knowledge that she was valued for who she was, not what she could do for them. The Corps' face darkened. He tried to use his telepathic abilities to dominate Marcus, to force him into silence. It was a standard Drakari technique, overwhelming weaker minds with sheer mental pressure. Most species couldn't resist it, but Marcus just shook his head like he was shaking off a headache. He kept talking. He said that the Corps didn't scare him. Marcus had raised a daughter through grief and loss. He had kept failing station systems running on no budget and constant stress. He had survived on 3 hours of sleep for years while working double shifts to pay for Emma's school. A fancy alien in armor using mind tricks? That was nothing compared to real life. That was nothing compared to the strength it took to get up every day and keep going when everything seemed hopeless. The room was silent. No one had ever seen a human resist Drakari mental dominance before. Some of the other delegates looked impressed. Others looked shocked. The Corps looked furious. Then something even more unexpected happened. Other humans in the station began to arrive. They crowded into the diplomatic chamber, standing behind Marcus. These were workers, mechanics, janitors, cooks, cargo handlers, the people who kept the station running but who normally had no voice in diplomatic matters. One of them spoke up. She said that Shivara had helped improve the station's water recycling system. Her anonymous suggestions had saved the station thousands of credits and prevented a potential crisis. Several others nodded. Shivara had quietly been making their lives better for months. Another worker said that if the Drakari tried to force Shivara to leave, the human workers would strike. All of them. The station couldn't function without them, and they wouldn't work until this was resolved fairly. The station commander looked panicked. A strike would be disastrous, but before he could speak, representatives from other species started standing up too. A Velkari diplomat said that his government objected to forced repatriation. A Centaurian merchant said that the Drakari were overstepping their legal authority. One by one, the other delegates began to question whether the Drakari deserved their privileged diplomatic status, if they were going to use it to kidnap someone against their will. The tide was turning. Shivara watched all of this in amazement. These people barely knew her. Some had never even met her. but they were standing up for her. They were risking their jobs, their diplomatic relationships, their safety, all because they believed it was the right thing to do. This was what humans did. They built communities. They stood together. They valued compassion over power. And somehow, in their chaotic, messy, wonderful way, they were winning. The Corps realized he was losing control of the situation. He made one last desperate move. He announced that if Shivara refused to return, the Drakari Empire would use its diplomatic influence to have Marcus blacklisted from station employment. He would never work in this sector again. His daughter would lose her school placement. They would be forced to leave. The threat hung in the air like poison. Marcus went pale. Emma, who had been sitting in the audience, looked terrified. Losing his job would destroy them. They had nowhere else to go. But then the human workers made their move. The woman who had spoken earlier stepped forward. She said simply, "If they fire Marcus, we all walk. Every human on this station. You can't run this place without us, and we won't let you punish someone for having a heart." The others echoed her. They would stand together. They would protect their own. This was bigger than one friendship now. This was about whether power and threats would win, or whether compassion and loyalty would mean something. The station commander saw his entire operation about to collapse. The other diplomatic representatives saw the situation spiraling out of control. And Shivara saw finally what she had to do. She raised her hand and the room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at the Dragon Queen in her wheelchair, waiting to hear what she would say. Waiting to see what choice she would make. And in that moment, Shivara the Magnificent knew exactly what she wanted. For the first time in 500 cycles, she knew what mattered most, and she was ready to fight for it. Shivara spoke, and her voice carried the weight of centuries. She said that she had been royalty of the Drakari Empire. She had commanded fleets and ruled systems. She had been taught that power was everything, that physical perfection was essential, that the strong survived and the weak should die. But the Drakari Empire was wrong. And she could prove it. She told them the story of the Empire's fall. Not the official version, but the truth. The Drakari had become so rigid, so obsessed with perfection that they couldn't adapt. When they encountered problems, they blamed the imperfect rather than fixing the systems. When their economy struggled, they culled the disabled rather than changing their policies. When their military failed, they executed the wounded rather than learning from mistakes. This worship of perfection had rotted the empire from within. They had driven away their best minds because those minds were in imperfect bodies. They had lost brilliant strategists, engineers, scientists, and leaders, all because of injuries or disabilities that had nothing to do with their actual abilities. Shivara looked directly at the Corps. She said that when she was injured, she should have been treated as a wounded soldier given medical care and respect. Instead, she was abandoned. The Empire lost her strategic knowledge, her diplomatic experience, her engineering expertise. And for what? Because her legs didn't work? She gestured to Marcus and the human workers. These people understood what the Drakari had forgotten. They understood that worth came from character, from kindness, from the willingness to help others. They valued people for who they were, not just what their bodies could do. A human child had seen past her disability and her fearsome reputation. She had seen someone who was lonely and sad on her birthday. And that child had offered friendship, simple, pure friendship with no conditions attached. A human mechanic had treated her like an equal. He had valued her mind and her knowledge. He had worked beside her without seeing her wheelchair as a weakness. He had shown her what real respect looked like. Now the Corps came offering her legs in exchange for isolation. But Shivara had learned something important. She didn't need to walk to have worth. She didn't need physical perfection to have purpose. She needed connection, friendship, and the freedom to choose her own path. So she was making her choice. She formally renounced all her titles in the Drakari Empire. She rejected their offer. She claimed asylum with the human delegation of Station Karis 9. The room erupted. Such a thing was unthinkable. A member of the royal bloodline couldn't just renounce their heritage. The Corps stood frozen in shock. This was beyond anything he had imagined, but Shivara continued. She said that the Drakari Empire had declared her dead to them decades ago. They had abandoned her when she needed them. She owed them nothing. The only people she owed anything to were the ones who had shown her kindness when she had nothing to offer in return. She used the exact phrase the Drakari had used about her. She declared the Empire dead to her. In Drakari culture, these words were final, irrevocable. There was no going back from this. The core found his voice. He said she was insane. She was throwing away centuries of heritage, the chance to walk again, her place in history. For what? For humans? For inferior species who would be dust in a cosmic eye blink? Shivara smiled. It was the first genuine smile many people in that room had ever seen from her. She said that humans might be short-lived compared to Drakari, but they understood something her people never had. They understood that every moment mattered. That kindness was stronger than power. That love was worth more than empires. She would rather spend 50 years in a wheelchair surrounded by friends than 500 years walking alone. The station commander quickly recognized Shivara's asylum claim. Other delegates supported it. The Drakari had no legal grounds to take her now. She was no longer one of their citizens. She was under the protection of the station's human community. The Corps tried one last threat. He said the Drakari Empire would remember this insult. There would be consequences. But his words rang hollow. Everyone in the room could see that he had lost. His threats meant nothing against the simple, stubborn compassion of humans who refused to abandon their friend. As the Corps stormed out, Marcus approached Shivara. He asked the question that had started all of this. The question that had become so much more important than he could have imagined. He asked if they could stay. Not just in her life, but be part of it. Really, truly be her family. Shivara looked at Marcus, then at Emma, who had run up to join them. She had burned every bridge to her old life. She had given up her titles, her heritage, the chance to walk again. But looking at these two humans who had changed everything, she knew she had made the right choice. She said yes. She would be honored. More honored than she had ever been by any imperial title. Emma hugged her. Marcus put a hand on her shoulder. And in that moment, surrounded by cheering humans and supportive aliens, Shivara understood what she had been missing for 500 cycles. She understood home. The Drakari warship left the station the next day. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the galaxy. The story of the Dragon Queen who chose friendship over empire became famous. Some Drakari saw it as the final disgrace, but others, especially those who had been cast out for their own imperfections, saw it as something else. They saw it as hope. Over the next few months, other Drakari began arriving at Station Karis 9. They were the ones their culture had rejected, the disabled, the sick, the different. They had heard that Shivara had found acceptance here. They wanted to see if that acceptance might extend to them. Shivara welcomed them. With Marcus's help, she found them places to stay and work to do. The station community, led by the humans, opened their arms. These refugees were given chances they never would have had in Drakari space. The Drakari Empire watched this with growing alarm. Their rejects were thriving among the humans. They were happy. They were productive. They were proving that the Empire's rigid beliefs were wrong. Slowly, cracks began to appear in the Empire's foundation. Young Drakari started questioning the old ways. Why should physical perfection matter more than skill? Why should the disabled be forced to die? Why couldn't they learn from other species instead of considering themselves superior? The Empire tried to suppress these questions, but they were already spreading. Shivara's choice had planted a seed, and like all good seeds, it was growing into something that would change everything. But Shivara didn't worry about empires anymore. She was too busy with her new life. Teaching Emma advanced physics, helping Marcus repair the station's aging infrastructure, mentoring young Drakari refugees who looked up to her not as a queen, but as someone who had survived and found happiness despite everything. She had traded an empire for a family, power for purpose, isolation for belonging, and she had never been happier in her very long life. 6 months after the tribunal, Emma turned 8 years old. Her birthday party was loud, messy, and wonderful. The small hab unit that had once held just Marcus and Emma now overflowed with people. Human children ran everywhere, shrieking with laughter. Several young Drakari refugees sat awkwardly on the furniture, still learning how to relax at social gatherings. A Velkari couple from down the corridor had brought strange purple cakes that tasted like cinnamon. Even some Centaurian traders Marcus worked with had stopped by. In the middle of all this chaos sat Shivara. She was wearing a ridiculous pointed party hat that Emma had insisted on. It sat crooked on her head and the elastic band was definitely too tight, but she wore it with dignity. She was also covered in frosting from where Emma had playfully smeared some on her nose. The old Shavara, the Dragon Queen, would have been horrified by all of this. The noise, the mess, the casual disrespect of treating her like just another person at a children's birthday party. But the new Shavara, the one who had learned what really mattered, was laughing. Actually laughing, deep and genuine, as Emma told a terrible joke about a space pirate and a rubber chicken. Marcus stood in the doorway between the main room and the kitchen, watching. He had a similar party hat on his own head. He held a tray of more terrible synthetic cake, but he wasn't moving. He was just watching Shavara laugh at his daughter's joke, and something in his chest felt warm and right. This was what victory looked like. Not glory or conquest or power. Just this. A former queen in a wheelchair, covered in frosting, surrounded by the noise and love of found family. A daughter who was growing up believing that kindness mattered more than species or status. A community that had learned to value compassion over perfection. After the party wound down and most guests had left, Shavara helped clean up. She had gotten quite good at using her telekinetic abilities to do household chores. Plates floated to the cleaning unit. Toys sorted themselves back into Emma's toy box. It was a simple use of powers that once commanded warships, but it felt right. Emma was exhausted but happy. She sat next to Shavara's wheelchair, leaning against it the way she often did now. Marcus sat on the couch, equally tired. They had moved to a larger HAB unit a few months ago, one that could fit all of them comfortably. Shavara officially had her own quarters still, but she spent most of her time here. 3 young Drakari refugees lived nearby now. Shavara had taken them under her wing, teaching them that their worth wasn't defined by their people's cruel standards. One had a genetic condition that caused chronic pain. Another had lost an arm in an industrial accident. The third had a mental condition that the Drakari considered shameful. All 3 were thriving now, finding work and purpose on the station. They often came to these gatherings. They were learning what family could be when it wasn't based on blood or obligation, but on choice and love. They were learning the human way. Emma yawned and asked a question she asked every year now. She wanted to know if Shavara was still sad on her birthday. Did she still feel lonely? Shavara looked around at the cluttered room, at the decorations that still hung crooked on the walls, at Marcus, who was trying to get frosting out of his hair, at Emma, who was fighting sleep but determined to stay up longer, at the photos on the walls that now included not just Emma and Marcus, but Shavara and the refugee Drakari and various human friends. She said no. She wasn't sad anymore, not even a little bit. Marcus added quietly that it was good, because Shavara was stuck with them now. No getting rid of them even if she wanted to, Shavara smiled. She had learned a lot of human expressions in the past year and a half. She used one of her favorites now. She said there was nowhere else she would rather be, and she meant it completely. She had lived for centuries. She had ruled systems and commanded armies. She had known power and glory and the weight of empire. But sitting here in this modest HAB unit, surrounded by love and laughter and the simple pleasure of belonging, she was happier than she had ever been in all those long centuries. Emma finally fell asleep against Shavara's wheelchair. Marcus moved to carry her to bed, but Shavara stopped him. Just for a few minutes, she wanted to feel this moment, the weight of the sleeping child, the warmth of the room, the knowledge that she was loved not for what she could do, but simply for who she was. Later, after Emma was tucked into bed and Marcus had retired to his own room, Shavara sat by the window. Station Karis 9 orbited a beautiful gas giant, and tonight the view was spectacular. Rings of ice and dust caught the light of the distant sun, creating bands of color across the darkness. She thought about the path that had brought her here, the war that had crippled her, the betrayal that had cost her everything, the long years of isolation and bitterness. The day a curious child had wandered into her quarters and asked why she looked so sad on her birthday. If someone had told her then that she would give up her entire heritage, all her titles, even the chance to walk again, she would have thought they were insane. But now she understood. Some things were worth more than power. Some things were worth more than empires. Family was worth everything. And family wasn't just blood. It was choice. It was the people who stood by you when you had nothing left to offer. It was the mechanic who asked if you wanted pasta. It was the child who made you birthday cards. It was the community that defended you when you were threatened. The Drakari Empire was still out there, still clinging to its old ways. But Shivara had started something. Young Drakari across the galaxy were questioning the old laws. Refugees were finding new homes among other species. Change was coming, slow but inevitable, and it had all started because a human mechanic and his daughter had shown a simple kindness to someone who was alone. Humanity's strength, Shivara had learned, wasn't in their technology or their numbers. It was in their ability to see worth in everyone, to build bridges instead of walls, to choose compassion over convenience, to value the content of someone's character over the condition of their body. The Drakari had called themselves superior, but they couldn't do what humans did so naturally. They couldn't look past surface differences to see the person underneath. They couldn't build family from strangers. They couldn't love without conditions. That was humanity's real power. And it was stronger than any weapon, more lasting than any empire. A soft sound from Emma's room made Shivara turn her wheelchair. The girl was calling out in her sleep, probably having a dream. Shivara floated quietly to Emma's doorway. Marcus was already there, gently soothing his daughter back to peaceful sleep. He saw Shivara and smiled. They didn't need words. They both understood how precious this was, how lucky they were to have found each other. Shivara returned to the main room. On the table was a piece of paper Emma had left out. It was a drawing of the three of them together, with the caption, "Our family," written in careful letters. Emma had drawn Shivara's wheelchair covered in stars and flowers, making it look magical rather than limiting. That was how Emma saw it. Not as a prison or a symbol of weakness, but just as part of who Shivara was. And that was beautiful. Shivara the Magnificent had once ruled an empire from a throne. Now she spent her days teaching a human child about stars, fixing station systems with a mechanic, and mentoring refugees who needed hope. Her new throne was a floating wheelchair, and her new empire was this small family held together by love. It was a better throne, a better empire, and she wouldn't trade it for anything in the galaxy. The next morning, Emma woke early and found Shivara already in the kitchen, making breakfast with her telekinesis. Emma asked what Shivara was doing up so early. Weren't adults supposed to sleep in after parties? Shivara explained that she had been teaching herself human cooking techniques. She wanted to surprise Marcus with actual edible breakfast for once, instead of the terrible synthetic food they usually had. Emma giggled and offered to help. Together, they worked on the meal. Emma mixed things while Shivara used her powers to manage the cooking surfaces. It was messy and chaotic, and the end result was only slightly less terrible than synthetic food. But they had fun doing it. When Marcus emerged from his room, he found them laughing over burnt toast and eggs that were somehow both runny and hard at the same time. But he ate every bite, because it was made with love, and that made it the best meal in the galaxy. This was their life now. Simple moments, shared laughter, the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged, and somewhere, deep in Drakari space, other disabled and rejected people heard the story and dared to hope. They heard about the Dragon Queen who chose love over power, family over empire, happiness over perfection, and they began to dream of their own escapes, their own chances at acceptance. The ripples spread outward, touching lives across the galaxy, all because a mechanic and his daughter had asked a simple question, "Can we stay?" And a lonely queen had answered, "Yes, please stay forever."